Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Now, the coup that has taken place in Myanmar did come out of nowhere, seemingly, for many experts around the world. And I would imagine even for people in Myanmar themselves. There have been protests in the wake of that military coup, the ouster of Aung San Suu Kyi, who is a democratically elected leader of the country. Nevertheless, one of the major issues that has always existed, really, even during Aung San Suu Kyi's tenure, was that of the Rohingya. As we well know, a lot of them, a very large number of them, in fact, 700,000 plus, have fled the country already, seeking safety from persecution, military persecution many times. And now the worry is that with the ouster of Aung San Suu Kyi, the things are about to get a lot worse, not just possibly for the Rohingya, but also for other ethnic minorities in the country as well. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're now joined by Lwin, who is a Rohingya activist. He's a co-founder of the Free Rohingya Coalition. He is joining us today from Frankfurt. Joining us from Bergen, Norway, is Jostein, Kobbeltvedt, who is the executive director of the Rafto Foundation for Human Rights. Jostein and Nasan, thank you both for joining us today here in Scope. Jostein, let me start with you. What do you make of the military coup in the context of the Rohingya? What does this mean for the Rohingya and other ethnic minorities?
Well, it's a very dramatic and very sad development, both for the people of Myanmar and for the Rohingya. And it's obviously with the constitution that has been in place in Myanmar for the last years, the military has had enormous powers also during the civilian rule, but the military coup against elected officials is a dramatic turn of events. It's not going to make life easier either for the people of Myanmar or for the Rohingya.
Yeah, Isan, what are your thoughts about that? Because, the fear is that the very general who was responsible for the persecution of the Rohingya is now directly leading the country.
Now, Myanmar is, the military dictatorship is back in Myanmar. Myanmar has been ruling by this military dictatorship since 1962. Only 5 years, the Myanmar public has got this civilian government from 2016 to this 2021. So basically, the ethnic minority, including Rohingya, were suffering for decades. But now, after 5 years, the majority of the Burmese also going to suffer because, living under the military dictatorship is same like living under open air prison. So now, last night, the government ordered the telecom company to block the access to Facebook. Now the people there in Myanmar are using the VPN to pass their server. So for the Rohingya, the world know that that genocide is ongoing. We are already in the war situation for decades, especially after 2017. The people cannot move from one village to another. Before that, even they can move with the permission, but now completely living inside the prison.
Yeah.
They are dependent of this ration distributing by the ICRC and the WFP. So we are afraid. Still, there are 600,000 Rohingya remaining inside the country. And yesterday, new immigration minister had the meeting with his official. And he was saying, they will force the Rohingya to accept the national verification card, which we call genocide card. And then this card is designed for the foreigner. So within their administration, they are going to legalize Rohingya as a foreigner. And also, we are not sure, when they will launch the violence against this Rohingya. We are really concerned of our fellow brother and sister remaining inside the country, and also there are the other ethnic minority, Rakhine Buddhists and the Kachin, Karen, Shan, all are suffering. They will suffer more than than the civilian government.
Jostein, I wanted to ask you two questions, if I may. One, do you think that if we're completely honest, during the Aung San Suu Kyi tenure as well, it's not like things were good for the Rohingya, right? For these people, then, do you think it'll make a humongous difference who is really leading the country? And then secondly, as Nasan there said, and as you alluded to in your first answer as well, this is not good for any ethnic minority, is it?
And I think that, well, you're perfectly right. I think the situation for the Rohingyas has never been good, but it's obviously become worse also now with the persecution, and I think what we can say genocidal acts of the last 4 years since around 2017, and while those acts have been initiated by the military and the civilian government has had not been able to influence much of that, but unfortunately also has not been recognizing those atrocities. I think that's something which we from the Rafter Foundation, I think from also from the human rights community globally, have been very concerned about, and it's been a huge issue, and it's something that I think that it's been terrible to look at what's happened to the Rohingya population in Myanmar. But I think that with a military coup, with the military in total charge, there are even less checks and balances on what the military can do and will do, and also there is a long history of the military using these brutal methods in suppressing various ethnic groups throughout Myanmar. We know that there are many ethnic groups that are in conflict with the government and are being disenfranchised and in other ways, and the likelihood that they will have a better situation during a total military regime is not very likely, unfortunately.
Nasan, I wonder, and you can tell me, what is the relationship like between the Rohingya and other ethnic minorities in the country? Do you think that in some ways that this might actually unite all the minorities together?
Yeah, if you look, just a few years back, since 2012, there are the hate speech over the social media and inside the country that, the Rohingya are intruding the country. They are illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. So even the ethnic minority from the Kachin, Karen, and the Shan, even if they want to support the Rohingya, they're really afraid the majority Burma, So this Burma is ruling the country, so they're really afraid. But now, the suffering will be the same. The entire country will suffer. So we have to build the unity among all the ethnic minority and also with the majority Burma to fight against this military dictatorship. We are we are reconciling with the Rakhine Buddhists. Right now, we have, just 2 weeks ago, we released a declaration that, we are going to build a new society in Rakhine State with the majority Rakhine and the Rohingya and also with the other ethnic minority group inside the Rakhine State. So this is, under process. We are working hard to restore the unity among all the ethnic group in Rakhine State. But as of now, according to as the situation has been changed just on Monday, we have to work hard to build the trust and the unity among all the people in Myanmar. So we have to realize that our common enemy is the military, not anyone. We should not fight each other. So my full solidarity with all the Burmese people. They should not suffer. Even they didn't sympathize us. When the military kill and rape our women. When they force us to flee from our country, they didn't sympathize us. They that they supported the military, but as a human being, we sympathize their suffering. We will never support, any oppression, and we will always stand with the people who are under oppression.
Jostein, I'll give you the final word before I let both of you go. Do you think that the military might have miscalculated how much it can get away with in the year 2021? Because, before Aung San Suu Kyi was freed from house arrest, even before, she came into power in this tenure that she was currently in when she was overthrown right now through this coup, at that time, Myanmar was cut off from the world, right? But now we have the power of social media. We have the power of the awareness of what's happened to the Rohingya. Do you think that the military might have miscalculated in the fact that the world now is very much aware of what's happening?
It's difficult to say. I think this was a surprise that they were taking this step. It's difficult to say what their long-term game is here. It might be that some of the military leaders who are already being sanctioned for the atrocities against Rohingyas, that they have calculated that they have less to lose now, and that this is the way to change the power dynamics in Myanmar. They might also have been taken aback by the actual support that Aung San Suu Kyi got in the recent election, and that this is their way of changing dynamics. But I think that, as Nason is saying, I really hope this is that the people in Myanmar, ethnic minorities and others, are standing together against the military here, and that we from around the world in solidarity is condemning this coup, and that we are that also the world unites in making sure that the military doesn't get away with the actions we've seen now the last couple of days.
Very well. We'll leave there's a final word, but we appreciate both of our guests speaking to us respectively from Bergen and from Frankfurt. That was Jostein and Nason, who were sharing their expertise with us on what's happened there in Myanmar. Since the military coup, there are fears about what will happen, not just to the Rohingya, but also, as Nason there correctly pointed out, other ethnic minorities as well. Will this unite all the ethnic minorities? There possibly has already been some form of unity behind the scenes between them ever since the persecution of all of the above, really, but especially the Rohingya, at least on the part of what the international community has understood, but then the people in Kachin and etc., as Nason also pointed out. As Jostein there said, it's hard to know certainly what the game plan on the part of the military is, but in the year 2021, things are very different from what they were back before Aung San Suu Kyi came into power when she was in house arrest. The world is much more aware of what is happening in the country, and that then adds significant amounts of pressure on the military regime and military junta to act in accordance with international law and to respect human rights to the extent that the international community can hold it to account for. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss Russian politics and the latest coming out vis-a-vis the protests that are continuing in that country because of the jailing of opposition leader Navalny. He is, of course, returned from Germany, as we know, a while back after he had been poisoned, allegedly through a nerve agent. He's spending time there in a German hospital. Now, on the way back, he's been jailed for about 3.5 years, approximately, even though some of the time that he has spent, I believe, in house arrest will be taken into account. Nevertheless, this has had reverberations on the streets. As I said, protests taking place not just in Moscow, but across the country. How much of a threat really is this to the Kremlin / Vladimir Putin himself? That, of course, I imagine is something that will be debated and is being debated right now on the part of Russians and experts on Russia. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. And I'm joined by Dr. Nikolay Petrov, who is a senior research fellow at Chatham House. He's also a professor. He's joining us today from London. Joining us today from Moscow is Fred Weir, who is the Russia correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. Fred and Nikolay, thank you both for taking your time out to join us here in Scope today. Nikolay, let me start with you. What do you make of the jailing of Navalny?
I think that there were no good options for the Kremlin with regard to Navalny. And what has happened was the most probable one, but it doesn't fix problems the Kremlin is faced by, if especially to have in mind that elections to Russian parliament should take place pretty soon. And not only this, but what's going on in Russia now, it's political transformation, which should let Putin to stay in power after the end of his presidential term. And it's very important for the Kremlin to have a positive social background in order to go forward. And now this background is at risk.
Fred, you're on the ground there, and I know that I've spoken to you in the past as well about protests that have taken place in Russia. Certainly, these are not the first of their kind. Are these different? Is there more of a threat to the Kremlin right now?
I don't think the threat is immediate or overwhelming, but it is a constant thing that there is a certain segments of Russian population who are disaffected. The youth are sick and tired of Putin, who they've never known any other leader. The professional class or intelligentsia are really, really disaffected with the lack of democracy, the problems of just living under a regime like this. This is a traditional thing with them. People who are well-educated and professional and well-to-do tend to be liberal-minded. And there is a growing segment of the working class, people who were doing well under the Putin, revival in recent years, but have started to suffer. They've seen their incomes drop. So there's a basis for protest, and there is a certain core of people who will always come into the street. I don't see it reaching the whole population. There is a Levada poll which showed after the poisoning of Navalny that his approval rating among Russians had risen to like 20%, but his disapproval ratings had risen also to 50%. So he has a problem in terms of mobilizing that segment of disaffected people and increasing their numbers to what would be a critical mass and a threat to the Kremlin.
So then, Nikolay, what does this mean then in the coming days, right? Because we've already had this police crackdown. I mean, do you think that has actually made things worse, where they've brought a lot of undue negative attention really to these sort of protests?
I think so. And in my view, what has happened when we've seen the record number of persons detained, I think the Kremlin did increase the reaction onto what has happened and what is going on by increasing number of young Muscovites and protesters in different cities of Russia who are suffering now in police stations. And this is very important, that 10,000 protesters have been detained, and they felt brutality of the system by themselves. So we should have in mind 2011 protests when the catalyst was the fact that many young Russians came to polling stations to observe elections, and they've been faced by cheating, they've been faced by inability of authorities even to hide their cheating, and it served as a catalyst for protests. And now we do see something similar when authorities themselves play the role of promoter for Navalny, and those actions of Navalny and his strong supporters, core supporters, which could be not that essential at the scale of the whole Russian society, are becoming much more visible and much more attractive, just like the recent film publicized by Navalny.
Let's talk for a moment about that film, Fred. You know very well that another billionaire friend of Putin has come out and said, that's actually my house, I built it for myself, it's not Putin's house. Is that really the issue here, or is it Putin? I mean, I'm going to give three options here, and I just want to know your opinion on what's really in the crosshairs here. Is it because of that house and the corruption that I imagine exists in Russia, as in with many other countries around the world? Is it Putin himself, or is it the system of governance overall?
Well, I think depending on which Russians you're talking to, it's the answer is different. But indeed, that palace in Gelendzhik has kind of created a lot of memes. It's not the first time that Navalny has used a lot of information. He clearly has inside sources when he produces these videos. He nails the lavish lifestyles of officials who are living way beyond their stated means. And in Russia, that's easy to do because being in government generally means you have a pathway to getting rich. But Putin himself was never targeted by Navalny before. And the fact that he did that in this video, which he clearly paints a trail of corruption that leads directly to Putin. And then in his speech to the court, he taunted Putin. He singled out Putin. He made it about him and Putin, and that is a serious personal challenge. So I don't know where it leads. I don't think the corruption issues are enough to get most Russians off their chairs. It hasn't been in the past, but it makes Navalny a thorn in the side of authorities and the whole system. That it is his strongest card, the anti-corruption thing, and he's very, very good at playing it. But as I say, I don't think we've reached a critical mass. You would have to have like several orders of magnitude more people in the streets for it to become a big threat, or you would have to have a serious crisis at the top, of a split in the ruling elite or something that created the conditions for breakdown. I don't think any of those conditions apply right now.
Nikolay, I wonder what you think of how much of an effect the new Biden administration's approach to Russia will have and how the West as a whole responds to Navalny's jailing, right? Because I would think that there is an argument to be made for the West to be overplaying its hand through sanctions or otherwise.
I think that reaction of the West will not play any significant role, having in mind that Russia's relations with the West are aggravated since 2014 after annexation of Crimea, and there is not that much the West can do and want to do against Russian authorities, and of course will not play any immediate role. What is important, I think, it's the fact that Navalny is at the focus of international attention, which perhaps makes him safer, because I do totally agree with what Fred did tell about very personal conflict now between Putin and Navalny, and Putin feels like being very strongly humiliated by Navalny, and according to criminal rules, he should somehow demonstrate his entourage that it's impossible to avoid punishment, serious punishment, if humiliating the leader of the gang.
That's interesting. So then, do you think, Fred, that maybe Putin also overplayed his hand in thinking that, that he could stay in office for this long and remain popular? I mean, do you think there's an argument to be made that he should have left office earlier when he was at a high?
I think that argument might have been made at several points in the past 20 years. There are a lot of things that make Putin a hostage to the system he created, the necessary, indispensable man. I think that he may wish to leave, but there are too many pressures on him to stay. So I don't have the sense that he will stay forever. There's something going on in Moscow, something under the covers that suggests that the top elite are planning a transition, and that might be part of why Navalny is challenging Putin right now, because Navalny clearly has inside sources. They may not be his friends or his allies, but members of the top elite do help him to produce these videos to reveal these trails of corruption. That's been obvious. It's the unspoken thing about Navalny. So he may know stuff about what's going on in the Kremlin, or people who know are winding up Navalny right now, because these events are kind of out of the blue for Russia in January, February of this year. There wasn't any other reason why there ought to be a political crisis, but for some reasons there is one.
We'll have to leave that as a final word. The clock has got the best of us. We've had a very insightful discussion there with Fred and Nikolay speaking to us from London and Moscow, respectively. We're discussing there, of course, Alexei Navalny, his jailing, the fact that he has gone directly after Vladimir Putin. This becoming very much a personal fight, possibly, between the two men. But then at this time, Putin, as Fred there was mentioning at the end, and as Nikolay there also alluded to, is almost now a hostage to the system that he very much himself created. Maybe he overplayed his hand by staying in office this long. Maybe he should have left when he was at a high. And, you know, he's had high approval ratings, not in the long distant past either. Maybe he should have just left at that time when he was still at the top of his approval ratings. Is this as much of a threat to the Kremlin? Will it bring down Putin? Possibly not, of course, because the numbers are not on the side of Navalny at this time. He doesn't even have very high approval ratings, as Fred there had mentioned also. But we're going to keep a close eye, of course, in Russia, because there's very interesting developments to see exactly how and what then the ruling elite in that country will do. I'll be back with my final segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the PREVENT program, that counter-terror strategy in the United Kingdom. It's always been under criticism ever since it began because of the way that it does target Muslim students, especially in schools. Children have been targeted because of, simply having stickers that support Palestine and a whole host of other reasons as well, to do with video games even, etc. The UK has now appointed William Shawcross as a reviewer then of that counter-terror strategy. Now, Shawcross himself is quite controversial, and I mean, it's not likely to, I don't take it lightly to say this, but he does come off majorly as an Islamophobe, especially because of the statements he's made, and that's obviously what's been written about him online as well. It's hard to deny that label for him because of the way he's spoken about Islam within Europe in very negative terms. He's also been part of the Henry Jackson Society in the past and has been at the helm of a number of reports which have been quite negative, again, about Muslims in the UK and Europe. Let's discuss all of that a bit further and about how smart or not really the strategy of the Tory government is at this time. How exactly will a man with Islamophobic views as Shawcross really review properly the counter-terror strategy? We're joined now by Saffa, who is a solicitor. She's joining us today from Northwich. We're also joined from Bristol by Samir Seddougui, who is a PhD researcher in social policy and Islamophobia at the University of Bristol. Samir and Saffa, thank you both for taking your time out to join us here in Scope. Samir, let me start with you. What does the appointment of Shawcross say to you, right? Because it's not like this is the first such controversial appointment by the Johnson government or just by governments in general when it comes to counter-terror strategy and how they deal with Muslims overall, right?
Yeah, I think as you say, this isn't a particularly shocking revelation, although disappointing. I think it's more in line with, as you say, the Johnson government, who have been arguably targeting Muslims in their political campaigns over the last few years. Even before Johnson became Prime Minister, he had the infamous article referring to women who wear face veils as bank robbers and letterboxes, which I don't think he really ever apologized for. And at the time, some people argued that this was him making a claim for Tory leader by leading with an Islamophobic narrative to shore up support. This government has done this since then as well. Even during the coronavirus pandemic, there was criticism for the lockdown regulations that were implemented in the north of the country in July, just hours before Eid al-Adha. And many people felt that was arguably scapegoating Muslims, scapegoating this idea that Muslims were more to blame for the spread of coronavirus. So I think it's less of a break from the Johnson regime and more of a continuation of what some have called this structural hostility towards Muslims in the UK. And I think at a time when the government are facing a lot of criticism for their handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Decisions like this are strategic in trying to shore up an anti-Muslim Tory base that Johnson has been trying to cultivate for the last few years.
You know, on the scale of bad, right? It sounds and looks pretty bad when you're going after children, because that is what the prevent strategy does many times, right? Children who have had, for example, a sticker of Palestine on their respective backpacks or with themselves in their possession and or are playing a certain video game. I mean, this then has long-term effects on those children as well, right? What does this then say to the Muslims of the UK? I mean, that their children are being targeted in this fashion?
Yeah, so, I mean, on the basis of the children thing, very recently, I think literally on the weekend, there was an article that came out about a child who I think as young as 4 years old who was reported under prevent strategy for something he said to a friend of his during a game of Fortnite. I think he'd referred to his dad having some sort of weaponry, but of course was referring to his dad having weaponry within the game because he'd played it at his father's house. And what you see here is that a lot of people, you know, these kind of things make headline stories. They're worrying within themselves. But one thing you don't see outside of the articles and stuff is the long-term effect and impact it has upon the Muslim community. You rightly mentioned young children. So it's not just the impact upon the children themselves who are having to go through these kind of horrible and rigorous processes of the police knocking on their door. You know, more than likely at that age, you have no idea, you know, what is even going on. All you know is police are bad and that's it. And the impact upon the Muslim community is huge because you've got the repercussions upon the family itself, the local community itself. Sometimes, you know, even community members will distance themselves from other Muslims that have gone through this through, you know, no fault of their own. But yes, you rightly picked upon the fact that prevent seeps into, you know, so many levels of kind of your everyday day-to-day life. And that's what it's set up to do. You know, it's for public institutions. So whether that's, you know, you going for a routine hospital appointment, disclosing something, what you think is confidential to a doctor and then being reported, or you just as young as 4 years old playing a game of Fortnite with a friend and being reported. It's either, you know, literally how they say sometimes from cradle to grave, it's going to catch you at, you know, any instance in any part of your life. And that's the seepingly worrying thing about it, the fact that it seeps in at any moment of your life.
Samir, you know, prevent by its own definition is meant to be a counterterrorism strategy. And I would think it is logical to have good relations with the Muslim community or any other community, really any community across the UK, to then have them to be willing to point out anything that may, you know, untoward that may be happening within their circles. And I know that the Muslim community does on a regular basis point out if there are any quote unquote extremist elements within them that they may come across. But nevertheless, I mean, this spoils community relations, does it not? And that in and of itself is counterproductive, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as you say, I mean, from its inception around 2003 and then becoming public in 2006 to the 2015 Counterterrorism Act, which made prevent a statutory duty. Throughout this period, it has the prevent strategies has been criticised for targeting Muslims, for conflating Islam with violence and terrorism, and the referrals to prevent and the disproportionate number of referrals of Muslims in the UK has solidified this and left us in a situation where the majority of Muslims in this country don't trust the prevent strategy. And this is one of the main reasons why it needs to be reviewed and potentially scrapped following a review. I think that should be an option coming out of a review, which I doubt is going to be on the cards with William Shawcross. But the way it has targeted Muslims and sort of the use of surveillance through the prevent strategy and the idea of effectively institutionalizing the war on terror, which it was born out of in 2003 following 9/11, leave Muslims and civil rights and human rights activists asking massive questions about the credibility and the legitimacy of this strategy. And for that reason, the lack of legitimacy has left little engagement between Muslim communities and the prevent strategy to the point where it is not fit for purpose, in my opinion.
Saffa, you know, this is all coming at a time that, in fact, the entire world, and especially the Western world, is waking up to the threat of right-wing extremism / terrorism, right? Ever since Christchurch, and we can probably name a whole host of other incidents that have happened even in Europe, the Halle synagogue attack. I mean, the list is quite endless. Is this then, as Samir had alluded to earlier, a distraction almost because of the pandemic or something, that the government is trying to, you know, reroute some of the attention onto, quote unquote, what is called Islamic radicalism or whatever, even though the reality is that, you know, white supremacy and all of the above are also huge threats in these societies. And again, I'm not advocating that white children be treated badly either, but I'm just saying that, do you think that there needs to be then equal attention, if I may say, to all forms of extremism?
Yeah, so I think if we're considering extremism in any sense of form, what the government failed to do is ever just look at the root cause of it. And I think that's the biggest thing that they're always going to distract from. So they can implement any piece of legislation. I think one of the things that they put in favour of Prevent, when a lot of us are calling it out for its disproportionate use against the Muslim community, is that they like to harp on about the fact that, oh, no, it's not just Muslims that are being caught up in it. There is also, you know, we prosecute against far-right individuals as well. But for anyone who's an ardent campaigner against the Prevent agenda will say is that it doesn't make it right that it's also picking on, you know, far right children or far right adults, because as a whole the conversation needs to steer away from the prevention of extremism because of something that's in somebody's mind, because that's essentially what Prevent is trying to do. It's trying to you know, the word prevent, nothing has happened, you know, they're trying to kind of legislate against something that hasn't even happened yet. But what they're failing to do, and the main distraction, is they need to really look at what is the root causes of all these, any example of extremism. And I think the reason that they're distracting themselves and they're not looking at the root causes is because if they were to really look at the root cause, they'd have to actually look inward and actually consider what is it the government themselves have actually done that has caused this. I think Samir touched upon it really well when he said, you know, there's been an increase in any sort of extremism from especially after 9/11 and stuff like that, because there is that feeling of isolation upon, for example, the Muslim community within the UK, and a lack of sense of belonging. And the same can be applied to far right. For anybody who commits any sort of act of extremism, it is as a result of, you know, no sense of belonging or something, whatever it may be. But who has caused that? You know, you don't have to look far to the media to see what are they peddling in the media to cause whoever it is to cause an act of extremism. Is because they're turning them against each other as individuals. But the government are very much so, you know, distracting us away from that, just putting in pieces of legislation so they can actually pretend as if they're actually really doing something about it. But, you know, that they're not tackling really what the root cause is. And that's really what needs to be tackled, rather than implementing a piece of legislation and hoping, or even not even hoping, but actually just scapegoating one particular community.
Samir, I'll give you the final word before I let both of you go. Do you see any hope on the horizon? I mean, do you think that people are being able to see through this? I mean, I would think that the appointment of Shawcross is sort of, you know, that very obvious move that says, okay, you know what, we're not really going to review this Prevent strategy, and one may come out on the other side won't really necessarily be better than what is currently in existence.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be too hopeful at the moment, because at best, this appointment of William Shawcross seems to be designed to disenfranchise Muslims further, particularly disenfranchise any idea that Prevent is reviewable in a sort of constructive, robust and kind of evidence-based way, which is what people have been calling for years, is a more evidence-based approach. So far, there hasn't seemed to be any empirical evidence to suggest this process or this strategy works. Other people have argued that this is sort of stoking the flames further by appointing Shawcross in some sort of kind of culture war game where they're using Muslims as a political pawn. I think as you mentioned at the beginning, his history speaks for itself as director of the Henry Jackson Society, a neoconservative think tank that's deeply embedded in the Islamophobic narrative of the war on terror and counter-radicalization. So he's been invested in this industry for many years. He was in favor of the war in Iraq, which has only exacerbated political violence in the region. He spoke fondly of Guantanamo Bay, which by now should be closed. So I think it's hard to be hopeful, but I do think decisions like this will create a political backlash, which hopefully civil rights and human rights activists and Muslim-led organizations can harnessed to try and sort of raise awareness to the Islamophobia in UK and Europe and the West more broadly. But unfortunately, I think this is in line with the government's Islamophobia. You only have to look at Conservative councillors and Tory MPs that have been criticised or even suspended, but then reinstated for Islamophobia. So this goes right from the top to the bottom of the Tory party. They won't acknowledge a definition of Islamophobia, which is vital in challenging this sort of form of prejudice and bigotry and racism. So unfortunately, this seems like a continuation of the hostility that is faced by Muslims in the UK at the moment and more broadly in Europe. It seems in line with other European countries and their targeting of Muslims. In France, there is a particularly hostile environment at the moment towards Muslims. And we're seeing this across Europe and the US as well. And I think you only have to look at the relations that people like William Shawcross has within this network, from the Henry Jackson Society and their staff to Mikdad Versi raised an interesting point about the acknowledgements in Shawcross's 2012 book. I can't remember what it's called, Justice and something. But he acknowledges Melanie Phillips in the foreword to this text. And this is a woman who wrote the book Eurabia, pushing the Great Replacement, sort of Islamophobic and anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. She was referenced in Anders Breivik's manifesto, who committed the mass act of violence in Norway. So this is deeply troubling, and I think we have a lot of work to do to try and challenge this, but unfortunately not surprising.
We'll leave there as a final word. We appreciate both Saffa and Samir for taking their time out and for discussing this important topic with us. William Shawcross's appointment certainly not one that gives one much confidence in the abilities of the Tory government to really be able to self-regulate itself when it comes to things like Islamophobia or other forms of racism. This is not the first such controversial appointment by the government when it comes to reviewing quote-unquote Islamophobia or other forms of racism in the country. Will he really be able to review the prevent counter-terror strategy? What's he going to review? What's he going to say? I mean, he himself has views which are very clearly Islamophobic. He's already been on record to say that he's worried about the role of Islam in Europe. What does that say about then how he will then view how Muslim children should then be viewed and observed within schools regarding quote-unquote radicalism or otherwise? And as Saffa there said, it's not just about, Muslim children. It's also about anybody from the far right. Also, we don't want anybody to be treated in any such fashion where their children or even adults are treated in an unfair fashion, for their views. The root causes need to be understood and dealt with as a whole. No one's human rights, privacy, etc. should be, at issue at this point in time. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.